amuna kana hati. The thing it is we are going to go around. Good am a piece of farm and my piece of name strategy. I want to pindure. Good am a piece, the badger consultation fee. Mondu that Doma of my piece. I want to dating. I'm not. I'm not sure. I'm not. Huh? My pen and this one is a woman. My mirror and the gate. Mondu that and Zinini. Apana Murudu, Binda, Wuna. What about the butter? Chada Padara Mario, those are down. Some if you can change on a Japanaka Musaka village. I'm not. Senzelina.
Senzelina. Senzelina. Senzelina. Senzelina. Senzelina. Oh, my good friend, how are you? I've been seeing you since yesterday. How are you? Are you interested in mining? In mining? Are you interested in mining? No. What are you interested in? What is it? What anything that you want, my brother? I will provide for you, my brother. What is it? Yes, now we're talking. Yes, my brother. I can make everything possible for you. So tell me, so you know, come on, tell me what you want, man. What do you want, my guy? Come on. What? Maybe tomorrow. Oh, how about a house instead?
I don't have that kind of money.
No, I'll make it possible for you. I'm canceling my one. I'm canceling my one. I'll make it possible. Okay, think about it.
I'll think about it.
Think about it. Yes, think about it. And please. You get my number from that lady.
Senzelina.
Senzelina. Senzelina. Senzelina.
Here, come with money. No fire. And so now, I'm going to be able to do it.
Mchindo ndio na leo program. Monyora waya. Onyora waya. Nimpa 40. Kafuti yo 45. What the problem?
50. Amai. Banana.
Otosunga makakada.
Amai.
ita uone. Anamupeleka Ondaka tikuda kuti konda yako patarati. Kana kuti.
Yes.
Vana vedu vatikubereka nekwatiri DNA corruption iri. Vana vedu vazhinji vatoko corruption but is vabereki somebody chingotanidzana. Saka nhawu yecorruption iyi kai. Aiwa kutangoitangira kubva munhu chaimo chaimo. Tichikwira tichiendawo timonesana takabatana ndofunga kuti tinogona. This is the real situation. Ndikutendere nguva honest. Akamboitawo seni pane nguva ekuziya kwacho.
Thank you very much. Once again, good morning, everyone. I think we agree that corruption is a cancer, and it is central in efforts for domestic resource mobilization. And I think each and every annual conference by ZimCode must have a topic on corruption, the implications and impact of corruption on domestic resource mobilization, on taxation, on the economy, basically, because we agree that you cannot run away from what? From corruption. Ladies and gentlemen, as we start, can I please call Reverend B. Kahari for the theological reflections? Reverend.
Good morning, everybody, once again. I have to work with the time that I was given, so I'm not going to open the Bible, but I bring you to the attention of 2 Kings chapter number 4, from verse 1 to verse 17. The story of Elisha and a woman whose husband was part of the company of prophets. And after his death, the loan shark had come to collect her sons into slavery. I believe the husband had put the sons as collateral for the loan. But I want you to understand, as the woman came to Elisha, because during those days, prophets did not work alone, but they worked as a company of prophets. Maybe the reason was for quality assurance that the utterances can truly be measured, that they are from the Lord. So when the loan shark came to collect the sons into slavery, the woman ran to Elisha and said to him, "You know for sure that my husband was part of you. Look, now I have got a problem." And Elisha says to the woman, "What do you have in your house?" And she says, "I have only a jar of oil." And he said, "Go and borrow so that you can repay. I want to work a miracle." I want you to understand that God will not absolve you of your responsibility in fixing your debt problem. You have to do something, or otherwise the loan will eat you alive. The same with us as a country. During our conversation, we have to understand that God will not absolve us of our responsibility of prudence, our responsibility of being organized, our responsibility of fighting and tackling corruption, our responsibility of electing people who have got ability and capability to manage the national pace. May we bow our heads in prayer. Father, we thank you this morning. We thank you for the discussions from yesterday. We thank you for the discussions as we continue today. May you help us, may you empower us, may you enlighten us as we continue in this discourse. And after everything has been said and done, all the honor and the glory be given unto you. I pray for the masters of ceremony. I pray for the facilitators, clarity of thought, and I pray for good utterance. And I also pray for those who are listening to be able to absorb this information. And after everything has been said and done, all the honor and the glory be given unto you. In the name of the Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Spirit, I pray. Amen.
A round of applause for the Reverend. Thank you, Reverend, for those theological reflections. Now we move to the to the next item, the recap for day one. May we all take a piece of paper and a pen? Quickly. If you have a laptop, don't take a piece of paper, is it? You can even use your phone, right? There's this pastor who doesn't agree that Bibles can be on the phone. So every time he says, everyone with the Bible, raise your Bible. And then when we raise our phones, they are like, I did not say your phones. So if you can still write on your what? On your phone or on your... Yes. So yesterday we dealt with many things, and there were key lessons and perspectives and positions that were shared by a list of carefully selected scholars on public debt, on taxation, on resource mobilization, on the role of Parliament, on the powers, the mandate of Parliament, on whether things are where we are getting it right, where we are getting it wrong, and where we have also concerns, where we can improve. I want you to write just one key reflection from yesterday. What did you learn from yesterday? Or what major question do you think was not answered? Or what major question do you think was answered? What highlight do you think was made for you yesterday? So I really need those papers. I will give you 1 minute to just write that one small sentence. Do you think Parliament is doing its role? Do you think the three arms of state are equal in power? Should they be equal? Do you think we have a Parliament that can back at the executive? Do you think we have an executive that wants to be scrutinized? Taxation frameworks. Do we have enough taxes? Is the tax collection effort reflecting the resources we are getting? And are we using those resources efficiently? What is the general framework of our domestic resource mobilization? Is it good? Can we improve? What is the contribution of the informal sector in public debt management? Do we even include them? Petronella, do you guys even think of the informal sector in public debt management or in domestic resource mobilization? So there are several perspectives that were shared yesterday, and I just want you to write one sentence. One sentence on a piece of paper. 20 seconds to go. Don't give me a perspective on the theological reflections of yesterday, right? Or on the arts. Unless you are coming to dance a bit. The issue of public procurement, the issue of loans and guarantees, the issue of arrears, penalties. Why do we go to these over 3% guys, commercial creditors? That was the point by is it Honorable Chidua or Petronella who said, once we go above 3%, we are exposing ourselves. Those that charge 3% or above interest, we will be doomed. Fantastic. I think we are done. What were the key highlights from yesterday? Just one from anyone. Yes, number one. Do we have... sorry? Loud. Thank you. Proceed.
The tax base for Zimbabwe is low, and one of the reasons is that the economy is
SMEs instead of large corporates.
Thank you very much. The tax base is low, so Comrade Minister of Finance must expand the base. Not from the existing tax base, right? But other guys, who don't want to pay the IMTTs. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. Yesterday I learned that we need to close the gap. When ministers authorize other business to borrow on their behalf without following total normative.
Thank you very much. Yellow.
Does it think it's right to give the minister 70% borrowing right without its consent?
Okay. Parliament. Why do we allow a minister to borrow what? What is the correct reflection of this 70%? As long as we are below 70%, then he can borrow without parliamentary approval. Yes?
Biggest component of ZIM debt is in arrears.
Yes? Arrears. Thank you very much. I'm coming to those two other rows, so prepare. Honorable Mpunza, your side.
Morning.
Morning.
Yeah, what struck me hard yesterday, it was around issues of resource-based loans. Are they sustainable? And its impact in terms of the social impact, even the natural resource extraction, the damage which is being made, is it sustainable for the future generations? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Resource-based loans, very controversial. Do we need to use our resources when getting loans? Who values them? Do we have equipment to value the resources? Yes?
Morning. Yesterday I learned about the three structured dialogue platforms, the three pillars, which is one, economic growth and stability. But I then reflect to say what is happening to the informal economy, because I didn't see anywhere where they are also encompassed what the government is doing, what the treasury is doing to support the informal economy, since it's the economy in Zimbabwe. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Very key point. Does the structured dialogue platform invite the informal sector in its economic sector working group, or they just invite CZI, ZNCC, PAS? Should we not invite the informal sector all the time that the economic question is in play? Thank you, sir. Go ahead.
Morning. I also learned that it is very important that we engage our creditors as we try and pave a way in a motive to resolve our debt situation.
Thank you. The importance of engagement. If we fight them, we will not win the war. You fight the person who lent you money, you will still have to pay the money. Thank you very much, Honorable.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, what also came out yesterday is responsible sovereign borrowing for production without mortgaging future generations.
Let's not mortgage future generations. In Africa, in Zimbabwe, we do that. We pay the lobola of our fathers. Haven't you seen that? Sometimes we have to pay the lobola before the coffin gets into the ground, marrying a grave. So we are taking this bad principle all the way to the national economic problem. I was saying, I wish my father was able to pay everything. But my uncle, I might be involved in paying the uncle because my uncle did not pay all. Because he only has left daughters now. Who won't be able to pay? Can a daughter pay his father's lobola? Thank you. Go ahead.
Thank you, Doc. I'm yet to be convinced, particularly with the purpose and the existence of the Auditor General's office, considering that they tend to come up with the same reports, same recommendations year after year. Is it not some kind of misusing our money? Are we not playing with our brains? Particularly in local authorities, you'll find out that the report that the Auditor General gave last year is the same report, same recommendations 3 years after. Do we really need the Auditors General? That is my...
How can we strengthen him? We need him. He tells us there's rot. How can we strengthen his power so that whatever he says is acted upon, isn't it? If we destroy that office,
Well, it's a debate for another day.
Thank you very
because
much.
because I really don't see the purpose. Because we know there is rot. Whether there is AG's office or not, we know there is rot. But what is it that we need to do to keep the rot that is in there? I think that's the major question.
thank you very much. He had issues. He had hitting on the Auditor General's office. Do we have those people here? Do we have the office of the Auditor General's office in here? Thank you.
Okay, yesterday I learned that we have a problem in paying our debts, and we have accepted that we are not in a position to service our debts, but at least we have done well with the reports.
Okay, with which reports?
The reports that we are doing.
Okay. Fantastic. Debt servicing. Thank you, sir.
Okay, I'll reiterate the previous speaker's issue on the Auditor General's office. It's like it's a speedometer that is giving us some readings on what's happening. But the fact that some of the information they give us is a little bit backdated, which means we have no idea of what is happening in real time, which means the efficiency need to be fixed. Then on the issue of accepting that we do have a debt, we should also consider other funding options such as public-private partnerships rather than considering debts always.
Yes, thank you very much. This side. These two sides, they are not exempted. Anyone with the mic, just give anyone the mic. They will say something. Huh? Thank
Good morning. What I learned yesterday is debt is multifaceted, and it affects everyone, from the youth to the eldest of the eldest is affected by debt. So we really need to be prudent when it comes to debt. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Can a country live without debt?
Morning, everyone. Yesterday, I came to know that our public debt is around 21 billion. And as a nation, if you want to realize development, we need to manage our debt well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Honorable. Who are our major creditors? Who are these guys who we borrow from? You can think about that as well. Yes, Honorable?
Thank you very much.
Our prophet said that you're honorable.
Yes, I think I qualify. I think one question which I think has not been addressed is the justice question relating to our debt. We have got components of our debt where there are loans that were given to people with capacity to pay, or individuals with capacity to pay, but those debts were assumed by the government, and they are now a burden to taxpayers. So I think the justice question was scattered yesterday. Thank you.
Debt assumption. This is a debt assumption, right? Which debt did we ever assume? Honorable. Give him the mic. Which debt did we ever assume? The one was behind you, sir.
Thank you. I mean the component of our domestic debt.
Yes.
For example, some of the RBZ debt that was then assumed by the government. We know, for example, some of the loans under the mechanization program. We have got people who are farmers who are making a lot of money. And I think yesterday we talked about taxing the rich. Some of those people are the rich people that we are talking about, but they actually have the capacity to pay for the loans that they were acquired under the RBZ. But that debt was then assumed by the government, and it's now the ordinary taxpayers who are now having to pay for that debt. So that's the justice question that I'm talking about when it comes to our national debt.
Thank you. Key issue on domestic debt, right? Debt assumption. Farm mechanization, PISMAS. Was it PISMAS? Air Zimbabwe. Was it Air Zimbabwe? Debt assumption. They run into debt, they mismanage companies, and then taxpayer pay this debt. Somebody must say something about the 3.5 billion, and then we close from this side. 3.5 billion did, yes? From this side. Okay, not from
that
you.
side, not from you, right?
Not from you.
Okay, thank you. Is this working?
Yeah, we can hear you. It's working.
All right. I wanted to answer on behalf of the Auditor General when they said it's like the reports, they are not yielding any help. What the auditor does is she audits and brings to light what is happening. The audit reports are meant to give information to those charged with governance. And in terms of the public sector, who is charged with governance? The question now is on accountability. Accountability entails responsibility. It entails monitoring and evaluation. Who is going to monitor and evaluate? Now we know what is happening. Who has the responsibility to correct what is happening? It is not the Auditor General. It is not someone who gives you the information. So when you're given the information and you don't know what to do with it, then it means that as a citizen, are you fit to call yourself a citizen? There's nobody who's going to come and answer, who's going to come and solve the problems for your country, for Zimbabwe. It is us who solve our problems. So for those charged with governance, in local authorities, they are the councillors. But the question is not, I'm sure, dwelling much or giving much of the problem to local authorities is not fair. Local authorities are just a lower tier of the central government. And if you are to talk of public debt, you realize that they are just on the receiving end, just like everyone, just like the normal citizen. And since they are the younger baby, they can then go, they can then shout and say, the central government is doing this. For example, yesterday, when Honorable was talking about the devolution funds being given to local authorities, 1, 2, 3, 4. If you are to ask which local authorities has received any devolution fund for the year 2024, there is no one, not even a single local authority. But they can't then shout and say, we are not receiving these funds. And when we talk of public debt, we are talking of a debt which has ripple effect on the local authorities and on the service delivery as well. If you look at the debt allocation that was reported yesterday, you realize that the local authorities 0.25% of the allocation in the public debt. And do they receive those funds? So sometimes pushing the blame on someone who can't just cry out, this is what is happening, it won't solve the problem. At the end of the day, we need to be accountable for whatever we do. Even for this workshop, are we just going to discuss things and is it going to help anything? Someone needs to be accountable some way, somehow. We discussed this and this has to be solved. And this is what the people think. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The last person, do we have a last person? Yes, at the back. You can be loud.
The 3.5 billion.
Thank you.
Okay. For me, it was the confirmation that our government is very neoliberal and the injustice of prioritizing only white commercial farmers. There were workers who worked on those farms who were equally pauperized, but there is no mention of compensation of those people whose livelihoods were ruined. They are only interested in appeasing international capital so that they continue to borrow and buy luxury things for themselves. Then also, there was the absurdity of the situation where 10 billion dollars is said to have been unclaimed because no beneficiaries were identified. That is obviously a lie, because on the ground, we are seeing children who are not in school. We are seeing children who are actually starving in schools. So that was another thing which I thought our reflections would help us to see the insincerity of some of these reports.
Thank you very much. The Minister of Finance wants to respond. We are happy to have a proactive Minister of Finance that, that can correct us, that can also react.
Thank you. On the 3.5 billion compensation, global compensation deed, former farm workers are considered there. For a former farm owner to apply and get compensation, they have to clear their former farm workers through the Ministry of Public Service, Labour and Social Welfare. There is a certificate that is given there. If a former farm owner cleared his or her former farm workers, they get a labour clearance certificate. That will be part of the application for compensation. And if the former farm owner does not have that certificate, we deduct 10% on the compensation towards the former farm workers, so they are covered.
Thank you very much. I'm just hoping that reality is well known by the former farm workers, right? Yes. And that the 10% deducted actually goes to what? To them, right? But it's a very good initiative, by the way. Let's say it works. It's a good initiative, right? They should also, but do we give them time to even pay? When we took the land, the way we took the land, did we even give them time to settle all their obligations? We just went there, get away. We are here now. This is our land. This is your farm, but your farm is on my land. Some of them.
What are we paying, asking the farmer to pay the workers? Are they just paying salary arrears or what?
I think mostly.
But then that's not fair. Because this 3.5 billion that we are paying these people, ukazoona kuti vangani vakaunza that kind of money ipapa, because vangadai vachibhadharwawo for loss of future earnings. Because vanhu vaka-affectwa the same way yaka-affectwa varungu yavo.
So the compensation is for improvements in terms of the constitution. So if you wanted to expand that to other payments, we have a problem.
3.5 billion.
So we'll end there, right? But it's a huge issue. The land question is so complicated. It's so difficult to resolve to the satisfaction of all the stakeholders. So thank you very much for those reflections. I'm very sure. Are you from the Auditor General's office? Yeah? We must get you a job there. That was a very good decision. We need to build strong institutions. Andrika, strong institutions. If the Auditor General's office have to link with the ZAC, let them recommend the prosecution to ZAC or to NPA, isn't it? Or to the police. Our belief is if the police investigates, they find a crime, they arrest, isn't it? Auditor General investigates, find a criminal action, sits, doesn't do anything. So we need institutions, interagency collaboration, strong institutions, proactive institutions that work together, especially in the area of what? Resource mobilization and also protection of our resources. So those are very key issues. I think that were not flagged very well yesterday. So thank you for the presentation, not for the highlight. At this moment, we have today we have two presentations. One from Mr. Joy Mabenge and the other one from Dr. Prosper Chitambara. I'm advised to start with the one from Dr. Prosper Chitambara. I'm advised he is online or he is delegated. Do we have Prosper here? Is that connected? So I'm advised that Dr. Chitambara is not yet connected, so we will begin with Mr. Mabenge. So Joyce advised me that most of 3/4 of his speech was addressed yesterday. So if he comes here, he will be repeating. But I said, no, just say something, right? Yeah, so you come and also add to the debate. We appreciate that he is here with us in person. So may we clap hands as he comes to take off the podium.
Good morning. Thank you so much, Dr. Sabora. So before I speak to you, and to contextualize the person you are seeing in front of you, I want to recognize the founding chairperson of the organization convening you today. And that is none other than Jonah Gokora. Mr. Gokora, please, can you, with your indulgence, can you just stand so that Jonah Gokora is the founder of Zimcod. And that was in the year 2000. And I say this to you in order to give context to the 5 minutes I've been given. I was part of that journey with Jonah, and I worked for Zimcod from 2001 to 2008 as an employee, including being the head of secretariat for 3 years. And then at some point later in life, I then was asked to provide leadership as a chairperson. So I think that is important in terms of what I want to say to you. In the sense that John and Janet, our very own Janet there, Janet Joe, where is John? John Maketo. And of course, before I go there, let me do the right thing. So the right thing is to, after acknowledging Jonah, the right thing is to write on protocol as already observed and say, all protocol duly observed. That said, I think on your program, it probably says Action Aid, and this is to acknowledge that I heard the work of Action Aid International in Zimbabwe. But what I am going to say here is not necessarily what Action Aid has sent me to say. It is my perception around debt justice. So I gave you this introduction about Jonah in order for me to talk about one or two things in terms of our view on resolving the debt question. Is this thing working actually? Oh, okay, great. So let me start by telling you that I am two things professionally. I am a political scientist and a political economist. So I appreciate economics, but that is not my zone. So we have great minds in terms of the appreciation of economics amongst us, from the central bank, from the Ministry of Finance, and others like Dr. Prosper Chitambara. And I must say, Petronella, my sister, thank you so much for your input yesterday. I sat through that one and a few others. It was really, really very powerful. Thank you very much for that. Now I said I'm a political scientist, so I exist at the intersection of politics and economics. So it means I use figures to interpret and probably give voice to what I think the figures are saying, and therefore in some instances assist in giving direction to public discourse. Now, having said that, in 2000 and 2001, and because John asked me to talk about debt justice, it is like being asked to talk about climate justice. Climate justice is fundamentally different from climate change, isn't it? Because of the justice factor. It's about, let me put it this way, economic governance or economic rights is also fundamentally different from economic justice. Economic rights are probably what you see in the expansive Bill of Rights that sits in the Constitution But economic justice is the justiciability of those rights, isn't? How do you as an individual claim and enjoy them? How do you bridge the gap between the rights holder and the duty bearer in order to produce justice? Sisonke? Sawa sawa? Sawa sawa? Excellent. Now, in resolving the debt question, I am here, the position or the issue I'm going to table may not necessarily align well with current processes, but it is what we call popular views. Popular views are the views that were created, and I do appreciate that institutions evolve, and they evolve over time, and they assume a different complexion, and that is perfectly okay. And I say this knowing that as I was seated there, Jonah whispered something to me. It was the tagline of ZimCode at the point that the organization was formed. The tagline of ZimCode at the point the organization was formed. If we have a roving microphone, do we have a roving microphone? Yes. Please take that microphone to Jonah. It was like a slogan. Jonah, I'm sorry to put you on the spotlight, but I want Jonah to say it himself because he whispered it to me, and it's just a tagline, and I will continue from there.
Thank you. I was just asking, I arrived yesterday, and listening to the conversations, analysis, and also trying to understand the context and the figures presented. We had a slogan that said, given our analysis and our understanding of the debt crisis that we are in and the figures that are being presented, those days we're talking about 9 billion, not 20 billion. We're saying we don't owe, that was our conclusion. We don't owe and we won't pay. Can we say that today?
Right. 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 So it's important. I say this in order for me to recenter messaging. Now, recentering messaging, it is like when you go to negotiate, you don't negotiate from where you want to end, isn't? It's common practice. If you know that you want to get 3 million, unotanga nekuti ndiri kuda 5 million, isn't? So that when you arrive at middle ground, you are not defeated. Are we together there? So here is the point. The debt justice movement is steeped in history, and the history is known. Historical facts. At independence, and these are not my figures, at independence, the government inherited a debt of slightly over 700 million USD in terms of the figures, the official figures that are there. Around 1990, and your guess is as good as mine, and I say this to talk about the justice factor in order for us to understand both exogenous, which are external, and endogenous, which are internal factors. Now, in terms of the history of our debt, in 1990, we all know that, in fact, it is not possible to de-link the debt question from global developments, which global developments are the issues around neoliberalism. And our interface with neoliberalism in this country, it is a history that is undeniable. Our interface with neoliberalism dates back to 1990. The adoption of economic structural adjustment, isn't? It's a fact. It is there. And there is an argument that says the IMF and the World Bank brought economic structural adjustment, yes, but the government was not an innocent bystander, isn't correct? They actually adopted economic structural adjustment, and we were told at that point to tighten our belts because of austerity and many of these things. Now I say this to you in order to center the justice factor, that in fact, the accumulation of debt itself over the years, if you take Petronella's argument and you then put it out there and you realize that the bulk of what we owe today, the bulk of the 21 billion we owe today is arrears and interest on arrears plus penalty. Is that not so? Is that not so? It is correct, isn't it? Because it was presented there as figures. Now, it is not possible to center a justice conversation without interrogating those figures and understanding how the debt has been accrued and understanding how the money has been used or abused and understanding exactly who owes and who must pay. And remember, I said, what I am centering here may not necessarily be aligned, but it is a political economist's analysis of the situation and, of course, what we call centering the justice factor in the resolution of the debt question. Now, if we have to center the justice factor, we cannot ignore the issue around the ideological, issues that we sit with. So neoliberalism and centering profit, those that lend money don't lend it for free, isn't? This is why there is interest. This is why there is, we continue to actually have what we are calling penalties and all these things. At the individual level, it happens. At the national level, it is happening. Now, in the last minute of the 5 minutes, Sabora, that you gave me, I spoke about 1980, and in 1990, figures tell us that the debt stock had risen to 3.2 billion. I am not presenting to you the disaggregated analysis of that 3.2 billion, but in 1998, the figure had risen to 4.7 billion roughly. And when Zimcode was formed, the figure stood at about 8.3 billion. So we have fought continuously for the past 24 years. What have we fought for? We have said we need debt justice. And the issue that we have said over the years is we actually do not owe, so we will not pay. There are arguments that sit in there. Some of the arguments are arguments around ecological debt. Some of the arguments are arguments around the legitimacy of the debt itself. And lawyers will tell you about the principle of odious debt. Those conversations cannot disappear. It is like wanting to disappear loss and damage from the conversation around climate financing. It is not possible. Even global leaders themselves have agreed that loss and damage is a key issue. Come back to debt and also have arguments that speak about the legitimacy and illegitimacy of the debt and analyze it for what it is. So that when you table the issues, we know the facts are there for us to see that the government is hamstrung by debt, as in whatever government, whether it's the First Republic or the second one. The government at any given point, assuming that they are repaying their debts, they are definitely hamstrung by repayments. And they are hamstrung, but when they are hamstrung, the effect is felt not by the elites, but it is felt by the poor or the poorest of the poor. So the poor, or those that live in poverty, which is the correct language, isn't? No one is poor because nobody applies to be poor. You are put into poverty, so you live in poverty. Now, those that live in poverty are the ones that have to bear the brunt in terms of austerity and many of these things that sit in there. Now, I say this in order for me to center the argument that the voice of the people in terms of the debt resolution, the voice of the people represents justice. The voice of the people represents what has to be done. It is correct for the government to go and negotiate using figures. It is correct for the government to go and argue out certain things. But it is imperative for the people to also air out their views in a manner that is understood, to want to derive and arrive at justice. What does debt justice look like? Debt justice looks like the voice that is not on the table. Are you with me there? Debt justice looks like the woman that is in Lotito who cannot access services. Debt justice looks like the young person who cannot access employment. Debt justice looks like a hospital without medication. Are we together there? If we do not center the argument appropriately, this is going to keep going. I did give you figures, and you could see that from 2001 to now, the total debt stock has more than doubled. Whether we are seeking relief or cancellation or even restructuring, the debt itself has kept going. Now I have one proposition. It is my proposition. I am not saying take it, you can leave it. There comes a time when we must at least seek for a moratorium on the continued accrual of interest, on the continued application of penalties. If the figures we saw yesterday are correct as they are, something that we would want to consider. Otherwise, a few years from now, the total debt stock will be 30 billion. Assuming our GDP, which probably by figures given, which some dispute, assuming our GDP is 45 billion, and assuming there is no growth, when I say there is no growth, I'm just putting it across as that, our debt stock may actually eclipse our GDP, isn't? And that is going to be something that is very, very difficult for us to bear. So why don't we also, in negotiating, at least cap, let's cap. We get to a point yekuti unoti shamari ndazvinzwa kuti ndokuwabhadha ungaramba wongoti handifi ndakagona kubhadhara zvinezvi uda kuti ndife here. You understand? It's an argument that may not be on the table, but I think it's worth considering. Janet, I don't know how far we went with the argument around, we started off with a citizen's debt audit, the official one. Honestly, I have not followed. It may have been done. But the official debt audit, perhaps Petronella, it's, maybe the figures are based on an official debt audit, I do not know. But an official debt audit may also reveal certain things that may be important for us as we negotiate the resolution of the debt. With these very few words in 5 minutes, I thank you for listening, and I hope it's something you will be able to consider. Thank you so much.
Can we give Ango Joy another big round of applause? So I gave Joy like 2 minutes to prepare. And he was like, no, Uncle Johnson. Got, Joy, you must say something. Although it was said yesterday, find an angle. So we are happy that he used these 5 minutes. And it was, those were key perspectives, right? Debt justice. Who is going to pay for the debt? Is there fairness? The woman in Chiwi, the person who is heading cattle in Mwenezi, afraid of mermaids. The Handa in Mutoko, where I come from. As well as the hustler in Harare and Blawayo, who is busy pushing cartwheels, trying to sell tomatoes and bananas to feed kids in Epworth. The issue of debt is very key. When you assume these debts, these are rich people who would have taken these things. So the justice issue is always controversial, even in law. Sometimes judges say, I hear that the law is on this side, but justice is on what? On the other side. But we are courts of law. So we decide based on the law. They say justice is on this side, but the law is on this other side. So when they say that, they mean justice is controversial, it's so complicated, they won't be able to really issue justice, but they'll interpret the law as it is. There's a case that they said that when a woman was claiming matrimonial property that was built on the ancestral land in the rural areas of the husband who had died. Kumusha wako mkazi ndo kumwenezi marora na muka kwa mtoko mdara wako pakachi kamunda. Ikoko, the husband dies. The woman wants to sell the house to another person or remarry on the ancestral land of the Tsaboras. Remarry to the Mabenges. And the land transforms to the Mabenges what clan? But the court said the justice on this side, but so the issue of justice is very, very crucial in issues of debt. So we thank you very much, Ango Joy, for those remarks, for those perspectives. We will try to make sure that you present again, prepared or not, next time, or in the 7th one. So come prepared. The next presenter, Dr. Chitambara, I am advised that he is ready to make his presentation. So I will allow the IT guys to assist. Right. So, Dr. Chitambara, welcome to the conference. You are free to go. Thank you.
Thank you, say. Glorious morning, esteemed colleagues. I hope that you can hear me very clearly.
Yes, we can hear you.
Maybe
please go ahead.
Excellent. No, we thank God. We thank God. We thank God. So I'm not going to speak for a very long time. I just have a few slides that I want to share with you. So let me just project my PowerPoint presentation. Yes. Yeah. So the title is Centrality of Macroeconomic Reforms to Debt Sustainability. So I thought it prudent maybe to start by giving us an overview in terms of the global macroeconomic environment and also the local macro environment, because I believe that those factors have bearing on the sustainability. Now, when we look at the global macroeconomic environment, it's fraught by a number of uncertainties, a number of volatilities, owing to factors such as the geopolitical tensions and rivalries, the war between Hamas and Israel, the continued war between Ukraine and Russia, and of course also climate-induced shocks. A number of countries have actually been affected by climate-induced shocks, especially in sub-Saharan Africa, Zimbabwe, of course, the El Nino-induced drought. So in terms of growth at a macro level, the IMF obviously is expecting growth to remain stagnant at 3.1%, while the World Bank and the OECD are projecting growth to slow down this year. From the World Bank from 2.6 last year to 2.4% this year. Then the OE Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development from 2.9% last year to 2% to 2.7% rather this year. Then of course back home, the official projection has been revised to 2% from an initial growth projection of 3.5% last year, but of course down from Actually, it's 5.3% last year and 6.5% in 2022 and 7.8% in 2021. Of course, the agricultural sector has been the worst affected by the drought. Maize production, for example, is declined by 77%. Also, that's going to have severe recessionary and inflationary implications on the macroeconomy. Now, let's look at the issue of debt. So, most countries are actually in debt distress. In fact, according to the IMF, about 39 countries are currently in debt distress. And of those 39 countries, actually 33 are in sub-Saharan Africa. So, and look at how much global debt has actually increased over the past just 4 years. In 2020, the global debt stock was 226 trillion. Then it rose to 303 trillion in 2021. Then it hit a record 307 trillion in 2023. And of course, that huge debt burden puts a severe stress and drain on the country's economies. In particular, the poorest are actually affected through massive reductions in spending on things like social protection, education, or even health spending. So there's a huge crowding out effect on these critical productivity enhancing and poverty reducing sectors on account of that high debt burden. In fact, there's a study that was actually commissioned, it's been published, I think, last month by the Norwegian Church Aid, which actually shows that debt service is constituting about 42% of the revenues, and also about 42% of public spending. So in most countries, actually, debt service exceeds spending on these critical social sector spending. Of course, the numbers are even higher in Africa and in other low-income economies. But of course, the worrying trend in most economies, especially in Africa, is that debt service is increasing, both as a percentage of revenues and expenditures. But we're also seeing more domestic debt, the preponderance of more domestic debt, even though external component still remains dominant. And then the private component is increasing, owing to access to the international bond markets, the Euro bonds, in a number of countries, actually. And of course, we are also seeing the emergence of new loans, like resource-based loans, and also the growing incidence, again, of bilateral credit or lending, in particular, the emerging role, or rather the role of China in terms of the world debt matrix, especially in African economies. Now, the Zimbabwean economy also faces a number of structural challenges, which also affect debt sustainability, the issues of power outages, which affects utilization, which affects overall competitiveness across sectors of the economy. The issue of fuel, we've always highlighted this issue. The issue of high taxation, that's a major issue. The issues of high levels of informality. Actually, Zimbabwe is one of the highest levels of informality at about 62%, according to the International Monetary Fund. So obviously, that creates challenges in terms of domestic resource mobilization for the government, but also it affects the effectiveness of government's macroeconomic policies. High transport and logistics cost, foreign currency shortages, inadequate infrastructure, then of course limited access to and the high cost of credit. So all these factors actually conspire to make the levels of productivity across the economy very low, and that then creates a huge competitiveness gap within the economy, and it also then weakens our debt sustainability. That table there summarizes our macroeconomic performance using some of those key variables. You can see what's been happening from 2010, say, for example, in terms of real GDP growth or percentage change. In 2010, the economy actually grew by a massive 17%. But of course, that growth begins to peter out from 2013. 2019, of course, in 2020, it's like climate change-induced shocks, and of course, the COVID-19 pandemic in 2020. Then 2021, there was a rebound, a slowdown in 2022. and a slight rebound in 2023. Of course, you can juxtapose that with our NDS1 targets. Because according to the World Bank, the Zimbabwean economy must grow by at least 50% from 2023 up to 2030 if we are to achieve the target of being an upper middle income economy by 2030. Of course, we're way below. Last year, 5.3%. That's way below the 15% benchmark or threshold from the World Bank. So it's obviously likely that we are not going to achieve the vision of being an upper middle income economy by 2030 unless something miraculous happens from next year. But according to current trends, it will be impossible to achieve that vision. Then inflation has been a major challenge in Zimbabwe, I would say from 97, with the exception of the period of the inclusive government era. And of course, inflation is a function of fiscal ill discipline and also monetary ill discipline. We can also juxtapose that with our NDS1 target. And then in terms of savings, I think for me, this is a very worrying trend. Look at our savings to GDP numbers. At one point, in fact, for the greater part, if you look at our numbers from 1980, for the greater part, our saving to GDP is actually been negative. And of course, that doesn't augur well for investment, but also for sustained growth and debt sustainability. If you go, I was in China last year on a study visit. China, they've averaged about 35% in terms of savings to GDP. Then also look at our investment to GDP numbers. So the IMF has given us a threshold of at least 25% of GDP for both our savings to savings and also our investments. Then of course the issue of the debt, maybe we'll look at that in more detail in the ensuing slides. Foreign direct investment inflows, yes, last year it actually picked up, but our numbers are not optimal. I think the story there is that we need to continue to improve our doing business environment. Currently, the doing business environment remains very challenging. Let me just skip the other two in the interest of time and move on to, I've already mentioned that our economy remains highly informalized, but also, of course, it's a highly dollarized economy. In terms of informal employment, according to the latest quarterly labor force survey from Zimstat, informal employment actually constitutes 86.4% of total employment, which is a significant increase from 75.6% in 2019. Then our official unemployment rate is 20.5%. For the youth, actually, between 15 and 24, the official unemployment rate is around 29%. Then in terms of youth, not in education, employment or training, the rate is 49%. Of course, I've already highlighted some of the challenges with having high levels of informality, but it also affects, obviously, our productivity, because informality is normally characterized by lower productivity levels, lower income levels, limited social protection coverage, as well as the prevalence of poverty. Now, when you look at, I think these figures have already been highlighted, but of course the worrying trend, obviously, is in the massive increase in the domestic indebtedness from 5 billion in September last year to the current 8.7 billion as of June this year. So that is a huge impact on private investment. So overall, I would say that the situation remains a major impediment in terms of both external sustainability and also in terms of overall sustainable development. It has implications in terms of our access to constitutional financing. So whatever borrowing Zimbabwe is actually contracting currently, and last year we borrowed around 5 million US. So we are borrowing money at non-concessional terms. There's a huge premium that is attached to our borrowings because of the challenges with respect to our debt distress. Like I said, we are actually in debt distress. So last week I had a meeting with the management of the National Building Society, and they were telling me that they had gotten some working capital from, I think, a major multilateral financial institution, but they were actually an interest rate of around 19%, which is highly burdensome. For other countries, they are borrowing at around 8% on average. So Zimbabwe at 18%, that's on the very, very high side. So it affects not just government itself, but also it affects even the private sector. It increases the cost of financing. But of course, I'm happy that Jeff mentioned it earlier when I looked at the global macroeconomic environment. We are beginning to see a significant easing of inflationary pressures in the developed economies. The US, for example, in the July inflation rate is now 2.9% from a high of 7.7% during the time of the COVID-19 pandemic. In the EU, again, a similar trend. There's been a significant decline in the inflation rate. South Africa, their July inflation rate is now 4.6%, which is the lowest in 3 years. So obviously, that augurs well for central banks to continue to loosen the credit conditions or the financial conditions, which will also have a positive effect in terms of the cost of accessing funding or the cost of finance. Of course, we know government has undertaken a number of initiatives to try to address the debt problem. For example, in 2010, there was a sustainable and holistic debt strategy that was developed. In 2024, government formulated the accelerated arrears clearance debt and development strategy. In 2015, there was the Lima strategy. Of course, it was premised on a non-epic debt resolution, and the idea was to clear the debt arrears amount to 1.8 billion owed to our major multilateral creditors. So we've been able to clear our arrears with the International Monetary Fund. Of course, that doesn't make us eligible to contract new debt from these multilateral financial institutions unless and until we've cleared all the areas that we owe to those creditors. And of course, recently, government has established a high-level structured dialogue platform. And of course, sector working groups have been. For now, the traction on that front has been a bit slow. We're hoping that after the elections, traction was going, momentum and traction was going to increase. So I think there's need, especially to expeditiously implement, because already government has agreed with creditors and development partners on what the kind of reforms that must be implemented on a governance level or on institutional level and even at macroeconomic level to fully unlock and unleash the potential of our economy. Because unless and until our economy is actually growing fast enough and more sustained, then it will be difficult to sustainably address the debt challenge that we actually have. So I argue that a sustainable arrears clearance strategy must be anchored, number one, on inclusive and sustainable growth. Number two, improvements in productivity and competitiveness. Number three, structural transformation of the economy. And of course, number four, a very stable political environment is also paramount. So there's a scholar called Reinhardt, together with these other scholars, they actually were able to demonstrate that faster real economic growth contributed significantly to reduce the public debt burdens in a number of advanced economies. So ideally, our growth rate, our real growth rate must exceed the real interest rates that we hope in terms of ensuring there's debt sustainability. Of course, we must also highlight that debt in itself is not a challenge. Of course, it becomes a challenge and unsustainable when it is crowding out key productive enhancing expenditures, or even when the loan is not being used for optimal development purposes. In fact, in my recommendations, I'm going to look at what we call the efficiency of public investment as being critical in terms of optimizing and enhancing our debt sustainability. But also, more often than not, the issue of borrowing is symptomatic of deeper systemic crisis, which is reflective of political, and even economic instability, especially if the debt was contracted to finance non-productive current expenditure, as is largely the case in Zimbabwe. Then, of course, the issue of institutional reforms. I think that's also very critical. Maybe I'll just highlight that again in terms of some of the key policy recommendations. Because I always love to present that table there. But in the interest of time, let me not speak a lot to that. But suffice it to say that investments in education, health, and social protection are critical in terms of enhancing the overall productivity and competitiveness of the economy, which again is critical in terms of assuring and sustaining debt sustainability. Now, when you look at the whole issue of debt sustainability, assessing debt sustainability, it's also critical to understand how the debt is actually being used for. Now, a paper by the African Development Bank that was published in 2022 is actually shown that Africa on average has an efficiency gap of 39% in terms of public investments or investments by the public sector. So this actually implies that close to 39% of the debt financing is actually wasted or even spent on poor projects. This is far higher, of course, than Europe. Europe at 17% in terms of the average efficiency gap. Then Asia at 29%. And according to that same study, Zimbabwe, in terms of public investment, it actually has an estimated efficiency gap of around 70%, which is not ideal, obviously. So inefficiencies in terms of public investment management processes, which include, for example, the poor project selection, poor implement or suboptimal rather implementation, and again suboptimal monitoring and evaluation, actually results in a lot of the public investment not actually being turned or transformed into optimal productive infrastructure. So what this then does is that it weakens the long-term output gains from those public investments. So obviously, the enhancing public investment efficiency obviously can then contribute to ensuring that there is debt sustainability in Africa, and of course in Zimbabwe in particular. So according to that same paper again, the root cause of failing to translate that debt financing into optimal and productive public investment has been the poor public investment management, and also in particular even the institutions that are supposed to coordinate that whole process, the weakening in terms of those institutions. So it's critical then to strengthen these critical institutions as a way, obviously, of trying to close down that huge public investment efficiency gap. So emphasis must be placed, obviously, on enhancing the productivity of public expenditures. We also obviously need to focus on revenue mobilization, and of course, this will be critical, especially given the high levels of informality. We'll probably look at one or two strategies of actualizing that. Then, of course, overall improving the public investment efficiency. So all these three critical factors will actually expand the fiscal space that is available for sub-Saharan African economies, and of course Zimbabwe included. Then, of course, other impediments, there are delays in terms of implementation of key projects. This again also creates inefficiencies. And of course, those delays in most cases are on account of the weak interdepartmental coordination. And of course, in some cases, in some sectors, the low absorptive capacity, which also results from weak planning and weak oversight, among other factors. So enhancing state capabilities will obviously play a critical role in terms of optimizing public spending efficiencies and even further mobilizing additional resources to invest in different sectors, productivity enhancing sectors of our economies. So for Africa, even despite the aid and foreign direct investment, so this is another point, the point of illicit financial flows. Africa actually, in spite of the aid that we receive and even the foreign direct investment, we actually remain a net creditor on account of the high levels of illicit financial flows. So according to the African Development Bank, in the illicit financial flows actually account to as much as 6% of Africa's GDP. And of course, ultimately, they end up weakening financial systems and also jeopardizing debt sustainability. In Zimbabwe, for example, just through smuggling of minerals, the central bank has estimated that we are losing around 1.5 billion per annum through smuggling. So it then becomes critical for us to be able to close those leakages as a way of strengthening our financial system, but also as a way of ensuring that we lock in value and we are able to sustain our debt. In terms of some of the key policy recommendations, the first one obviously is that we need a very stable macroeconomic environment characterized by a stable exchange rate and low and stable inflation, or rather price stability. I think this is critical in terms of the management of the rising debt servicing costs and burden. Of course, underpinning that is the issues of fiscal discipline, spending money that we have actually earned, and also monetary discipline, not creating unsustainable, or rather not sustaining or supporting an unsustainable growth in terms of money supply. So I think for me, that's a necessary condition in terms of ensuring there is debt sustainability. Then number two, the issues of governance and structural reforms, in particular, emphasizing strengthening our key institutions. For example, through greater transparency and debt management, inclusive debt management, and also even in terms of account of state-owned enterprises, liabilities and other conditions like I think that will also be very critical. Then we need to enhance the public investment management processes, and one way of doing that could be through carrying out assessments or diagnostics. Some countries actually carry out what are called public investment management assessments, and also they carry out regular public expenditure reviews to inform any even requisite corrective measures that may be necessary to ensure that we are actually optimizing and enhancing our efficiencies in terms of public investment. Then, of course, legislation to encourage greater transparency of contracts, such as even digitalization, and also the publication of procurement processes. And that will also be critical in terms of the enhancing efficiency of use. Then we also argue that there's need to come up with a comprehensive institutional and legal framework for managing triple Ps. I mean, this is a major challenge in most countries, not just in Zimbabwe, but also across the African continent. The domestic resource mobilization will be critical. So what we need to do obviously is to put in place, or rather make it harder for people to evade and to avoid paying taxes, especially the multinational corporations, but also create incentives for people actually to comply. And of course, related to that is the formalization of the economy. Of course, in a number of countries, it's a major reform initiative, though most countries have not achieved major successes in that regard. But it's something that we need to work on. I think we need to be creating the right kind of incentives, especially the tax incentives. And that you might need to advocate for the scrapping of the IMCC as a way of incentivizing formalization just within the banking sector, but also even within the rest of the other sectors. When you look at the tax burden in Zimbabwe, we're actually one of the highest, the most taxed economy actually in the world. And that also then drives the formality. Because the cost, as long as the cost of compliance is high, it means there will be no incentive for people to want to formalize their business. So the issue of the formalization, we actually did a formalization strategy as an organization for the government. So I think the government must begin to implement that national formalization strategy that we've already developed, it will be critical. And that's also important in terms of ensuring that we broaden the form of productive base of our economy. So the issue of incentivizing transition to formality, I think, must be prioritized. Then in terms of when we look at our under sort of domestic resource mobilization, and of course this is also tied to the issues of high levels of formality. For Zimbabwe, we actually have one of the lowest revenue to GDP ratios. So I would say on African continent on average, revenue to GDP is around 15%. So in Zimbabwe, our ratio using the first half of the figures, our revenue to GDP ratio is only 9%. So obviously that points to weak domestic resource mobilization capacity. Of course, it is also driven obviously by the high levels of formality. Then that again, they should simplifying the registration process for businesses, fully embracing e-commerce, e-government, very critical. And of course, modernizing, making it simpler and easier for businesses to pay their taxes. Of course, once we're able to stabilize the economy, that should also incentivize domestic savings mobilization. I think that will also be critical. Then we argue that restoring our path to fast and employment-intensive growth will require for us to sustain stability. It requires us to invest in human and physical capital because that enhances the overall productivity of the economy. And obviously addressing structural bottlenecks for private sector investment. In spite of the challenges, we actually have a lot of opportunities in terms of turning around the fortune of our economy. We have a number of advantages that are actually going out for us. For example, in terms of our potential for non-renewable resources, and even in terms of energy, we can actually become self-sufficient, say, in terms of energy, if we are to fully leverage our potential in that respect. Look at even our arable land, our dams, so there's huge potential again for us to enhance agricultural production and also move up the value chain as a way again of ensuring that we diversify our economy and we transform our economy from being a resource-based economy to an industrial based economy. If you look at how much minerals we actually have in terms of our endowments, look at our levels of skills, instead of the out-migration of professionals, our skills base remains fairly strong. So as part of some of the challenges that we are experiencing, which they obviously affect or weaken our sustainability potential, if we are to fully leverage what we actually have, definitely we can be able to launch or relaunch our economy onto a sustained growth trajectory, which is critical in terms of fully unleashing the potential of our economy as a way of sustainably addressing the debt problem. For example, issue that I haven't mentioned is we need to also to restructure public spending. I've often argued that Zimbabwe, in terms of public spending, I think that we have a lot of potential to rationalize that. The structure of government itself, for example, it's highly consumption-oriented and driven, given the size of our economy and the size of our population. So I think there's a lot of scope again to restructure government spending as a way of rationalizing and also even ultimately enhancing the efficiencies of public spending, and also ensuring that we are putting more resources towards productive sectors of our economy. Thank you so much. Let me just end there.
Thank you, Dr. Chitambara, for that massive presentation. Those were very comprehensive insights, and we really appreciate you us. At this moment, I would like to put you to task, both Ango Joy and Dr. Chitambara, so that you take questions from the audience that we have. Ango Joy, are you able to come here and share a chair with me in front? Not a cup of coffee this time. So I will take the first round of 4 questions and the second round for other questions. And then we go to the next stage. Do we have an additional mic? I think you can sit any. Number 1, number 2, number 3. Ladies, where are you? Where are you? Nini handifare kana vachingotaura one gender chete azvibudi. Saka if I don't get ladies, I'm going to what? To do sarura wako. Anditika? Yes. And then they'll speak. So we have 3 this side. From the other side. Ladies. Yes, my lady. The 4th one. Thank you very much. I want a lady from this side. Saka gadzirai ladies. Anditika? Fantastic. Number 1. First one.
Okay. Thank you very much. Of course, I am also not a political economist, so the conversation tends to be interesting. Now, I just want to follow up a little bit on this principle of saying we don't owe and we don't pay. Because if you look at the historic sources of where our debt is coming from, I'll just give you some few examples if you're a little bit patient. When we were growing up in the rural areas, there was a time when there was a motor vehicle that was used by the Zimbabwe Republic Police called a Santana. Part of the loan that we have now was used to purchase those 1,500 vehicles from wherever they were purchased. But what I want to say is, in the rural areas, that vehicle was very popular. It helped deter crime. If people would just say Santana is coming, that on its own was very scary. I know that there was a musician from Matebeleland who composed a song singing about that Santana, saying, listen to its Huta, whatever. That vehicle was very efficient in reducing crime. So it helped, but we are in debt because of it. So we might say we don't owe. I can also talk about the NRZ. When we were growing up, NRZ had 3 categories. In fact, the bus was an option. We liked the NRZ. There was an economy class, sleeper, and the standard. And we would watch TV in the sleeper, in the economy class, all the way to Matebeleland. But part of the debt that we have, there is NRZ, first development project, NRZ, second development project. It used to spruce up NRZ, and we enjoyed. And we are now in debt. Again, we can talk about Wange Power. Some of the debt used to do the power project and all. I know there were some misuses along the way, but it was used for us, that debt, because we enjoyed. So I don't know if within the justice, of course, it's something else. I can say, I personally, I think I owe, because I enjoyed those. I also enjoyed the Santana, I think I owe. Okay. And then that is of course, probably it's not a question, it's just a discussion. The question is not there. Anyway. And then there's also another issue about GDP and debt. In 2022, our debt to GDP ratio was probably 90-something%. And we're told that 2023 probably is going to be 60-something%. But if we're asked to ask ourselves here, can we really say in 2022 we're worse off than what we were in 2023 because of this debt? I think we also need to move on from debt to GDP ratio. What we need to look at is debt servicing to GDP ratio, because that is actually what represents an outflow of resources that might have been used elsewhere. Because our debt is growing, but we are also not paying, we are ignoring, we're paying token payments which are actually less than the interest in the arrears. So it will continue to grow. But if we are not paying, obviously that number is scary. But for us, we are not feeling much of the impact because we are not even servicing that debt. Probably among the statistics that we present, we should also include debt servicing to GDP ratio. It might actually be something that you can easily relate with. Then just another issue from Prosper. It's not a question as such, but he also mentioned something about when I was analyzing the budget about targeting, I noticed, I don't know if Mtiso is still here, he used to call me to do the budget analysis and all. I think there's something that is quite interesting here. If the budget is analyzed, it is debated in parliament, and then you hear the parliamentarians saying, this time we managed to meet the Abuja declaration target, Maputo declaration and all. But that exercise is actually now irrelevant in the academic. Because we all know the truth. The truth is that the budget allocation towards the Ministry of Industry, for example, which is my parent ministry, is academic. They are never going to get those resources. Because we know that the Ministry of Finance itself, the Ministry of Defense, the OPC, Ministry of Agriculture, the resources that they are allocated every time, they are actually lower than what they are actually end up going to use. In other words, some of the budget that is in the Ministry of Industry calendar is actually disguised. It's not for them, but they are actually resources that are going to end up going to the Ministry of Agriculture, for example. So I think we should move away from looking at budget allocation. What we should look at is what comes out during the review, utilization ratio of resources that have been allocated. That is what matters, because we know, for example, in 2024, the Ministry of Transport, by June, half a year, they had used the 200-something% of their allocation. But where are they taking it? They're taking it from other votes. So in other words, probably we should also go beyond the numbers when budget is announced and look at the utilization itself, because that is what is actually telling us our usages. Thank you very much.
Okay, still on the same mantra of we don't owe, we don't pay. I wanted to hear much on the current state of Zimbabwe's climate-related debt and obligations, considering that we have been talking about climate justice, and as Zimbabwe, I know in terms of emissions, we really emit just a few percentage, but when it comes to climate impacts, we are really being burdened on that impact. So, and also in addition, what role has also international institutions and also climate finance mechanisms played in supporting Zimbabwe's climate-related debt management efforts? Because I know there are a number of mechanisms that are there in place. For example, I think Mabenga was talking about loss and damage. There's that facility, there's GCF. All those mechanisms, are they also playing a critical role in making sure that we also address the issues around debt management?
Thanks, Comrade Joy, for the refreshing insights on laying bare the beasts, liberalism and capitalism. It's quite refreshing. I just want you to reflect back to the Jubilee 2000, where more than 100 billion was cancelled in terms of debt for poor countries. This was a campaign that was championed in terms of people-to-people solidarity. So when you spoke of a moratorium, I thought you were implying governments would lead such a process of seeking clemency. Is that doable? Do you think it's time perhaps our movements should start thinking and working around a concept similar to Jubilee 2000?
Debt cancellation. I think another word for debt moratorium is debt cancellation. Somehow. Yes, my lady.
Thank you so much. I just want to appreciate Kule Joy for putting the face to the figures. So when I look at my mother in Nembuziya, my heart bleeds because I see debt and this impact. When I decide on traveling home, it takes me 5 hours to get in Nembuziya, but it's just less than 200 kilometers from here, and I have to part with $15. What pains me most is that I'm being forced to pay for a debt that I don't owe. Because when I'm looking at the economic organization, I've never benefited from it. My father never benefited from it. My great-grandfather never benefited from it. So I don't think that I should be paying for such debts.
Thank you. These are the four first round. No, I think we are good. Please do. Okay. I hope it's working.
Thank you, Doc. Mine is not directly related to the discussion now, but it's a reflection that I've been grappling with yesterday. And I thought maybe it will unravel this morning, but I'm seeing that we may not be getting there. I would have loved that we were at the 5th annual Zimbabwe Debt Conference last year. And I would have loved us to take a stock to make a comparison of how far we've gone from the resolutions that we had last year to date, and then see what is still hanging. My fear is that we will be having more issues coming and not taking stock of what has been done from last year. So I propose that maybe through the director at ZimCourt or maybe the board chairperson, maybe look at what we came up with last year and say from the outcome and the resolutions, this is how far we've gone. And for now, we are at this point and we're moving towards this direction. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that. So I allow the presenters to respond. Most of your contributions were comments, not questions. So we take note. So I allow them to respond or react to whichever they think they can react to. Thank you. So I will begin with Ango Joy.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sabora. My brother Cornelius. Yeah. Oh, you enjoyed Sandanas? Yeah. Some enjoyed Sandanas, some didn't. It depends on how you interacted with Sandanas. But so when I talk of a moratorium, it's not a debt moratorium. It's a moratorium on continued accrual of interest as well as penalties. It's for the decency of it. You know, when these, outweigh the principle, it's also, it gets to a point where it's so unsustainable, isn't it? This is probably one of the reasons why, assuming there is reason to pay, assuming, the government wants to pay, it becomes difficult. How do you, let's just take the external debt. Okay, let's put it all, 21 billion. And then it keeps growing, not necessarily only because the government continues to borrow, but because the interest on the principal and penalties keep growing. We get to a point where it's just not possible to actually pay or repay. So that was the point. Wange NRZ etc. I would pause on that. I think it's a deeper conversation around, if you heard what I said when I said an official debt audit. So I say this without assumption that it was done. I mean, it wasn't done. Zero assumption that it wasn't done, zero assumption that it was done. But it's something that I think if it were done, we would argue from a better and a good standpoint in terms of facts. As in, we would even see how the debt grew. There is a bit of opaqueness in how we have accumulated this debt over the years, but what we know is we acknowledge what we owe domestically and externally. The climate-related debt, very good discourse, but I think that one would need its own space and time. The argument I will only put on the table is that, so it is generally understood, Dr. Sabora, that The two largest emitters of greenhouse gas are fossil fuels and industrial agriculture, generally globally. And when you quantify, it is generally understood and agreed that the global south is less responsible. However, the global south, it is also generally understood that bears the consequences. And we live the consequences, by the way. We know, for example, that Mozambique, Zimbabwe, Malawi, at least these three, year in, year out, are faced with climate-related crisis. It's either there is too much water or there is little water. Too much water in the sense of cyclones that have swept away villages. Like literally, if you go to Chimanimani, there was a village here, settlement here, completely swept off. Or there is little water, as is the case now, and we call it El Nino-induced drought, isn't it? We understand these things. But here is where the catch is. In many a times, whether we have this appeal or not, in many a times, governments will actually receive loans, not grants, to deal with the climate crisis. I'm just putting to you a very simplified argument, and your debt keeps growing. Never mind about loss and damage, never mind about the GCF and all this, but it's something that we may need to discuss a little bit deeper. And from where I sit, I just interface with these things and I say we need grants, not loans, so that the debt does not keep growing because of a climate crisis. Of who's making, your guess is as good as mine. It's really, it's there, it's real. And the other comments really are much appreciated, Comrade Tatenta, Grasha, and all around Jubilee 2000, and the need to reboot. And of course, your point really, remember I spoke about three possibilities: debt relief, debt cancellation, debt rescheduling. All these things do not mean the same thing. It depends on what when you reschedule, I think it means you acknowledge and you say, I can repay in this manner over 20 years or something of this sort, and then you keep on moving this A, B, C, D, F, G, and you restructure and all. When you say cancellation, it actually means cancellation, isn't it? As in cancellation, if I go to the bank and I say, please cancel my debt, it means exactly that. As in, it's cancelled. And then when I go and I say I need debt relief, we work out relief mechanisms. For example, in the 90s, there was heavily indebted poor countries initiative. There was a multilateral debt relief initiative, MDRI and all. So you work out these things and then you agree. You say, okay, you do a poverty reduction strategy paper. Then we work out that we relieve you from paying this debt and the money goes there, which is often social services. I'm not saying these things have worked. I'm not a proponent of these things because they have not worked in Zambia, for example. I don't know how this would look like for Zimbabwe. What is the position that I think we need to bargain from? We need to bargain from cancellation. We need to bargain from cancellation first, and then we negotiate across the spectrum, and we meet somewhere. This is the point that I was making, Dr. Zabora, that it's like you are in South Africa, you want to negotiate for a GNU. You start off by saying, give us the vice presidents. And then they say, no, that one we can't give you. Even if you knew you were aiming for the Minister of Agriculture. You understand? So you start there and you keep going until you get somewhere. And then you meet each other halfway. It is possible to meet each other halfway in terms of existing frameworks, in terms of radical positions, we are under no illusion whatsoever that the debt would just be cancelled. As in, we know it's a popular position in our space, but we also know that negotiations may lead to something, but we need to place these positions from high up there until we meet somewhere in the middle. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Prosper, are you still with us?
Yes, I am still following. Of course, I've been having a few challenges hearing some of the issues. But I think I agree with what Brother Joy is highlighted, especially around the issue of bargaining or even negotiating a moratorium on continued accrual of existing amounts and charges on our external debt. Because when we look at our external debt, 80% are penalties and charges. So I think as part of our high-level dialogue platform negotiation, I think something that we must bargain and actually negotiate for. I think that will be very critical. Therefore, even the issue of the cancellation, I think it is actually a bargaining proposal that will be critical to work on. Then there was a question on whether the current change over from ZW to ZIG has affected our domestic debt. I think the answer is largely no. But what then happens is that as long as the economy is inflating, it ultimately then weakens or erodes the real value of the debt. So if it's just the changeover from ZW to ZIG, it doesn't really significantly affect the real value of the debt. But as long as the economy then continues to inflate, if there is chronic high inflation, obviously then affects the real value in terms of our domestic debt position. Yeah, maybe the other issues were already covered by Joy. It's around the issue of green financing and how climate change obviously has exacerbated our debt position and the debt position of most other economies on the African continent.
Thank you, Doc. Your network seems to say you are either in Zimbabwe or somewhere in Africa. But you are definitely not in Europe.
No, I'm not in Europe, sorry. I'm in Harare, somewhere in Harare.
Your network is very Zimbabwe.
I don't know why. Yes, someone was telling me that my network is not very stable. I don't know what's happening there.
So we can GPS you through your network. Thank you very much for that. Ladies and gentlemen, due to time constraints, I'll just allow maybe 2 more questions so that we go to the next stage. But I have one information I want to share with you and one more question of myself. The question goes to Ms. Petronella Mavinga. So I'll give her 2 questions. She will pick one. The other one she can tell you outside, right? Ms. Mavinga, what is the meaning of the pari passu principle and how does it work? If you can't answer that question or you don't want to answer the question, what aspect in the unfair global financial architecture would you want to be addressed so that the debt don't kill us? What aspect in the global financial architecture which is unfair would you want to address? So pick one question from that. Information. In banking law, do we have lawyers here? How many lawyers do we have? So I'm unique. Yeah. In banking law, there's a principle called in duplum rule. In duplum rule. Just write it down. In duplum, I-N, then duplum, D-U-P-L-U-M. In duplum principle. The principle says, if you borrow $10 and interest begins to run on $10 and the interest goes to $10 again, the interest must stop. And the debt can only be how much? $20. Are we together? A lender is prohibited from compounding the interest and the initial loan to become the capital so that interest begins to run.
Joy understood me though. Right. Joy must have a law degree somewhere. I don't know. I'll find a way of getting into law school, even night school. Even night school. Because you are saying some legal things without knowing. So it says, a lender, mukweretes, is prohibited from kubataniza initial amount, principal debt, the interest to become one, so that interest begins to rise. So, if it gets to $20, it has to stop no matter what. So when Joe was saying, I can't pay, that's exactly that principle that we were given by the Roman Dutch legal jurists in the 14th century, way back. So that the fact that Joy mentioned it shows you these principles are shared by humanity. He never read that principle. It's in the judgment, there's a case in the CBZ case in Zimbabwe, where this white judge called McNally went to town to say, where did this principle emerge? So he went to read books of the 13th century, not in Zimbabwe. But he joined Ango, in Zimbabwe, from Mwenezi. Dreams of mermaids. Somebody told me about mermaids in Mwenezi. The fact that he said, is a reflection of that time-tested principle of humanity to say, surely, a data, if you read literature, other than pound of flesh, Shylock. Legend of Venice, yeah, when you were growing up, were Shakespeareans. And I want my pound of flesh. Shakespeare is saying that some data may not need to be claimed. How to get in Dublum? So he did. Find the case here, CBZ case. You know what CBZ case in Dublum? Go and it. We were in case here. I see legalistic hysteria. It is trying just to tell you that in principle your banks are prohibited from continually compounding debt. So if we got this principle from Western capitalism, why is it not applying in our own debt situation? Double standards. I wanted to ask Dr. Bobo. Where's Dr. Bobo? Dr. Bobo, where's Dr. Bobo? Thank you. Economist, right? Fantastic. Domestic debt, caused by Roma. We moved from US dollars. We had US dollars. A lot of people had US dollar debts, institutions, right? And then went to RTGS. The debt just became RTGS. Didn't that have any impact on domestic debt? That movement from US dollars to RTGS to ZIG through SIE 2019. Does it have any impact on debt? Because I had a case where these companies were saying we were owed 200 million. Now it's 200,000. In 2 years, 200,000 RTGS could buy you 4 road runners. Really? Doesn't that have any effect on domestic debt? Right? Imagine if the 3.5 billion GCD US would be having affected by it. Isn't it? Sports. Altogether. So I'll take questions after this one. Not you. Did you say something earlier? Okay, number 1. Honorable number 2. Number 3. Ladies, please, ladies. Can you have my answer, right? Good. Fantastic. So let's begin with you, my lady. Yes. The comment. IMDT, the intermediated deal. No.
Not that.
Okay.
So the question was, do we then hold the Minister of Finance responsible, or do we then do due diligence and make a follow-up to say this that has been earmarked? You said you are collecting
what happened to the needs of education when they moved to this other one? Thank you.
Thank you very much. Yes, my lord.
Okay, thank you. I'm just coming from what he said when he was talking about what debt justice looks like, when he was talking about the marginalized groups and so on. My issue being the way we project ourselves as a country, when we start to talk about moratoriums, debt relief, do we really stand a chance? Because I'm just looking at the way political elites project themselves, the way we present, or the way we handle our business as Parliament, as Ministry of Finance. Because now I'm going back to the question which I asked yesterday, which is now looking at the issue of the oversight role. When we are doing oversight, what exactly, at what stage do we start to do the oversight? And do the results on the ground reflect that is that aspect of oversight? So it's just that mixed bag, which makes me think that even if I was the one who was lending to the country, I would not be interested at this juncture to hear about a moratorium until we clean the house. So it's that perception, that image that we project as a country, that is just what I want to get feedback from him. I know he's going to give me a very good answer. He made a very good presentation, so I know he's going to give me a very good answer. Thank you.
Thank you. There was a hand there. Yes.
So, as you have seen by the figures presented, our debt has been like wine, matured, and it also increased in strength. And with what we have been shown, roughly Zimbabwe, if I were to say, inherited a debt maybe from Rhodesia, right? And from there, it's been like a couple of decades now. Since we are in the spirit of negotiating, we had the 3 billion that is going, or that is needed by the former farm owners in terms of compensation. Then in terms of utility, we can borrow the notion that, you know what, the issue of enjoyed and Stakampona Kirwa. Most of those farmers, if not mistaken, they benefited from the farm mechanization programs that also were financed from that money which was borrowed prior to Zimbabwe's independence. But today it's 100% repatriation of those maybe compensation. And most of them, if you are to look, they belong to countries within that Paris Club, which is also at the forefront in imposing harsh penalties. Anglo Joy, what do you say if you say, you know what, of that 3 billion that we have to pay them, and not all of them have registered yet, but speaking around that 3 billion, what if we charge and also compound the percentage of accruals that also, that debt Zimbabwe inherited is now worth and subtracted from 21?
That's a village approach. Yes, Honorable Chiwo. Okay. Chikunda ungori muno mwere. Ungori muno mungoye.
Ndandi mudana katere.
Thank you, Honorable.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, let me direct my question to Dr. Chitambara. My question is going to revolve around the high-level structured dialogue platform. As we speak, we say we are economically hamstrung because of the debt. But the high-level structured dialogue platform, which is part of the arrears clearance strategy, requires us to clear our debt. And in order for us to clear our debt, one of the reforms requirements is for us to grow our economy, for us to have macroeconomic stability. But at the same time, we are saying we are not in a position to achieve stability because of the debt. But then they are saying achieve stability. So there is some paradox here. How then do we proceed going forward? If this paradoxical argument is going to remain, is the high-level dialogue going to succeed? Because the reforms, they are saying we need stability first for you to benefit. But for us, we are saying we are not able to have stability because of debt. Then to Joy, I've heard that in the world now, we now have what are called debt vouchers. This is where countries who just take their debt and sell the debt to a voucher. Then the voucher will just come to Zimbabwe and do whatever they want. In terms of your analysis, do you feel that we are likely to be thrown to the vouchers?
Honorable, do you have an example of a voucher that we can Google?
Then the issue of ring fencing. In terms of the law, we are only supposed to have one account as a country where all the revenue that is collected in the country goes, which is the Consolidated Revenue Fund. If the minister is going to make a presentation and say, we are going to tax airtime vendors and whatever we are going to tax there is going to be used to buy cancer machines. If it is not supported by law, by way of the minister coming to Parliament and ask the August House to have a ring-fenced account, him having that ring fencing without the support of the Parliament is illegal. So he can make that pronouncement, but if everything goes to the Consolidated Revenue Fund, it will just be used as normal. So what should follow up the pronouncement is for him to come back to Parliament and say, can we have a separate account where we are going to ring fence things? So what I have noted in most of the cases is just an announcement and there is no legal ring fencing. Yeah, so I would say that's the position. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I wanted to give to Petronella.
Thank you.
Thank
Yeah,
you.
pari passu just means equal treatment. So in terms of debt, the loan agreements, they have a clause where it says pari passu, which means we have to treat all creditors the same. If you are paying, we have to pay all creditors. If you are not paying, we don't have to pay to all. So for, say, when we started accruing arrears, then we started borrowing from China. Then we were paying China, and the other creditors were saying you are violating the pari passu clause. But our argument was that China is disbursing to Zimbabwe. That's why we are paying. We are paying to unlock the disbursements. So we are only paying for the active portfolio. For those creditors that are disbursing to Zimbabwe, that was our argument. Otherwise, they were saying we are violating that pari passu clause, which means equal treatment.
So it means if you are owing 10 countries, right, in Europe,
yes,
and then you want to give France 5 million, you have to give everyone 5 million.
No, we do on a pro-rata basis, but we have to pay to all.
Let's say 2% each.
Yeah, that's why you see on the token payments, we are doing pro-rated on the IFIs. We are paying World Bank 1 million, then 500 to FDP. That is because of their it's pro-rated. Mm-hmm. Then on the Paris Club, we are just paying 100,000 to each. That's the pari passu clause that we are using.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Then I just want to comment, Uncle Joy can add on the debt vouchers. The risk is minimum for us to have debt vouchers. It's
Can you
because
explain a bit before you go to your answer? What are these guys?
We don't know them. Do you know them? What are these guys?
They just, maybe like debt collectors, they buy your debt outside, say from Germany. Then with that claim, they come to Zimbabwe. They can attach your embassy, your airplanes.
Your parliament?
Yes. Yes, our parliament can go. But because of the structure of our debt, mainly it's the bilateral creditors, multilateral creditors. So bilateral creditors, those are countries, governments. The UK government cannot sell our debt. Yeah, but it mainly happens to countries where they have private creditors. So it's easy for a private creditor to sell to vouchers. But because our debt is mainly bilateral creditors, those are countries, multilateral creditors, so they cannot sell to vouchers.
Okay, thank you. So it's a dangerous world, is it? It's a terrific world. Okay, Dr. Good.
Okay, thank you, Madam. I'm not too sure if the ministry is properly computing local government in this country. I understand 2015, the IMF talked of 555 million. But I project, or my view is that your analysis of Zimbabwe's debt is including plus or minus 7 billion of local government domestic debt. So I want to find out from you, kuti muri kuri vongorora sei, muchicomputa sei, plus pozvino imari local government debt. Then to Sekuru, Caledonia Farm is 20,000 housing units, but no institutional, there is no proper public infrastructure there. We are yet to decide on how we are to establish that. Zvishavane is at 2018, it is about 9,000 housing units, but they have since shot up to over 18,000 without developing off-site infrastructure, our dams and so forth. If you go to Gweru, the woodlands is in a dam site and water logged. There is no good infrastructure there. How do you propose that fund the establishment of infrastructure in our urban areas? And what are your projections in terms of the growth of our debt emanating from the definitive position that we have to put proper infrastructure there? I really need the answers on it. And perhaps could change up because I'm sure my projections, this debt in the next 10 years is going to grow by double its current size or even treble. Because there are no infrastructure in our areas, and the only option, economics talk of the pecking order theory, it's debt financing. What are your views, sir? Thank you.
Thank you. I think let me give the presenters time to make a response. Most of your issues were also comments, so they will pick what they can answer. Thank you very much.
Okay. So I think in the interest of time, I'll skip most of the comments and happy that Petronella has responded to Honorable Chidowa's question on vouchers because of the structure of our debt. Zambia was exposed to vouchers and the consequences have not been something any country would want to experience. Dr. Chapunda, your question is very difficult. And I hear you. And look, the issue here is that, as Petronella said yesterday, borrowing is unavoidable. The issue is what you borrow for, how you use the resources, and how you plan to repay. Because you are talking about infrastructural development, etc. And you know, at the moment, my understanding, very peripheral, it may be wrong understanding, we have massive infrastructural development happening in the country being funded from local domestic resources, a good amount of it. That sort of one way or the other deprives key social services. And all I'm saying here is it's unavoidable to accrue debt But the process through which we accrue debt must be transparent, and we must always have a plan going forward, of course. If you borrow for the common good, and you use the money for the common good, I don't think there would actually be a problem. Of course, the conditionalities around what interest rates are being applied, etc., that's for negotiations, and we know what is best for us. My brother, the last one, if you were expecting a good response on do we really stand a chance given how things are. Look, for me, the issue really is about it's difficult to bunch duty bearers and rights holders all in one basket, in the sense that sometimes what duty bearers do may not necessarily reflect what rights holders are going through. I am speaking in very generalized terms here, in order for me to say sometimes, yeah, let me pause there and say we can take this conversation further outside if you so wish, and I can explain to you the point I would belabor to express seated here around the fact that it is not always the case that what you see elsewhere reflects the generality of what everyone else experiences in terms of expenditure patterns and all these kind of things that make it difficult for you to even put an argument around, as you were saying, let's put a moratorium. After all, the biggest argument though is that lending is a business. Lenders are in the business of lending, and therefore they will squeeze you in terms of recovery. So unless sometimes you push back, you will be squeezed until you know you can't be squeezed no more. So it will be important for us to craft a pushback mechanism which safeguards the generality of those that are really severely impacted by a repayment mechanism that does not take into account the state of affairs in terms of social safety nets, health, education, and these things that we so much care about, that those that are at the periphery really are impacted on so much because they cannot afford anything else other than that which is provided to them by the system and that which they can access. On that note, Dr. Tsabora, let me take the opportunity also to thank you. I thought I was going to do just 5 minutes and not have any questions directed. But it's been lovely engaging with brilliant colleagues in here. I do hope that these and many other views will constitute a package that helps us as a nation to find common ground in terms of when we negotiate with creditors, how we negotiate, and also package that which is good for continuity, especially for the ordinary person. Thank you.
Let's give Ahmed a round of applause. There are some questions for Dr. Tambara, but he was going on and off the internet, so we can leave them for another day, but we can engage with him also outside this platform. So for now, I will allow Angojoy to take his seat as we move to the next stage. Another round of applause, please. Right, we have time to go to tea break. I think it's exactly tea break time. Yes. And then when we come back, we go into these cluster sessions. I'm not sure whether I am correct. Kuzwa? Right. So let's have a tea break of this one. It is behind time. So for 10 minutes. 10 minutes or 15 minutes, right? What we will do is we're planning to end at lunch. So we'll come back, right? So we are likely to have late lunch and then never come back, but not as late. So as I was saying, that we are planning and hoping and praying that we will be done at what? At lunch, and then we won't come back, and then we can take a longer rest, and we also want to try to write these reports. So I've just been advised that it's good for us to go into our clusters now. We go for a tea break, we come back straight into what? Into our clusters, instead of reconvening and wasting time after tea. Kuzwai, can you please try to come and help me again on the clusters? I'm forgetting how we arranged them. So we have 5 clusters. So we have 5 clusters that we have from yesterday's group. These are thematic cluster sessions, right? So we have cluster 1, cluster 2, cluster 3, 4, and 5. So what we would like to do is we want you to come up. We want to place you into these clusters. I think you're already placed, isn't it? Yeah, we want to place you in these clusters and ask you a particular question that you must deal with, and you do a report back on that question, right? So for each of the clusters, we are going to identify 2 issues, 2 major issues, right? 2 major issues in relation to domestic resource mobilization, environment, natural resource governance, and climate, then procurement and investment. So I'll come again. The first issue that we are going to, 2 issues under each what subject topic altogether. The first major issue must relate to domestic resource mobilization. What is the key major issue or highlight? I think craft it like a recommendation, right? Or craft it like a statement of reality that must be addressed, right? Number 1, on domestic resource mobilization. Number 2, on environment, natural resource governance, and climate and debt. Is it climate of debt? Climate debt. Climate and debt. Climate and debt, that's number 2. Then number 3, procurement and investment. What is the major issue? All these issues must be underpinned by the theme of public debt management. Are you together? Sustainable public debt management. It must be the center pin for all these issues. So 2 issues under DRM, under environment, NRG, climate and debt, and also under procurement and investment. So for cluster 1, the cluster 1 is the inequality, gender, and public debt cluster. So here, I had Equality Now, Fight Inequality Alliance, YET, Women's Coalition, NASCO, PPC Budget and Finance. These are the groups that must be in this cluster. Equality Now, do we have Equality Now? Do we have Equality Now? Do we have Fight Inequality Alliance? Do we have them? Yes, YET. I think we have YET. I've seen YET. NASCO, I think we have NASCO. I've seen NASCO yesterday. Yes. Then we have PPC Budget. Yes, we have the chair. So you guys, you must also give me 2 issues on those 3 subtopics. The second cluster, private sector and public debt. In this cluster, we have ZES. Yes, we have ZES, Zimbabwe Economic Society. CZI. You're there? Thank you. BAS, Bangers Association. Thank you very much. BAS had a point, I think he had a contribution. I'm sorry that I forgot to ask. So these are the 3 sectors in cluster 2. Cluster 3, local government, service delivery, and public debt. Right, we have UCAS. Who is UCAS? Urban councils. Do we have acting mayor? Any councillor? Okay. Fantastic. We have ARDC. Do we have? Fantastic. PPC local government. I think. Do we have the PPC local government? Okay. Can I put PPC? Okay, I know. I can put them. Then we have CRA,
combined rural residents. Are you here? You are in this group. Right? Then in cluster 4, informal economies and public debt. VSET, do we have VSET? Fantastic VSET. BVTA. Great. Zichia. Zichia means what? Chamber of Informal Economy Association. Are you friends with Chamber of Commerce? Do they invite you and do you also invite them to your breakfast? Do you want to be invited more and more? Yes, we want to. You are the poor cousin? Yeah, we are the poor cousin. Poor cousins are difficult to invite all the time. Okay, Zichia, thank you. ZCBTA? ZCBTA? Okay, we don't have them. Then socio-economic justice and public debt. TIZ, I think we have Tafaza, yes. Nango, I think we have Nango. Fantastic. ZimCode, we have ZimCode. ZCC, all ZimCode officers must find themselves in each and every what? Are you together? If you are ZimCode, make sure that where you are, there's no other ZimCode. Are you together? You want a ZimCode in each and every what? Cluster. ZCC means Zimbabwe Council of Churches. I made a mistake yesterday and somebody made another mistake of your own kind. Right? Is it because we have ZCC, the church, these jumpers and Motungamere wango Jesu. I love that song. Nanazi uno awabike pamwe. ZCC, PPC Education, Honorable from Zaka, Honorable Chair from Zaka. PPC Health, I don't think we have them. Health, we are? Fantastic. Health was quite old this time. Honorable, when they never told me that the health was next to you. Next time I will not miss you. You have to say something, right? You and Buzz. So you are in social economic justice and public debt. So let me repeat. Identify 2 major issues, either of concern or recommendation or proposals or statement of realities in relation to DRM, right? 2, on environment, energy, and climate and debt. Procurement and investment. Procurement. You had chitambara chiti efficiency gap yedu 70%. My projects edu are kurasamari, are poorly, you know, there's no efficiency in our projects. Asima roads akabuda boma kaya una roads kwarari. Akabuda zvakanaka zvututu. So find out 15 minutes instead of 1 hour kona kumba kondogara. Ndisingamanyi. So let's go for tea. When we come back, let's find a way of going, of just the, where can they go?
They can just go in with the tea has been served over
This side.
but they can convene anyway.
Okay, just to try to assist for the last time. For cluster 1, inequality gender, you can sit there. All together. Cluster 2, you can sit here. Cluster 3, here. Cluster 4, here. Cluster 5, outside here. So we will try to, we'll be walking around to see, are you doing business or you're on WhatsApp? Or you are doing other work. All together? Okay, those who I have not mentioned to come into any cluster but who are here with us, find yourself comfortable in any group. Choose any group and then go there. In your groups, please identify a reporter or a rapporteur, a person who report on those issues. We'll give you 2 minutes to say what are the issues that we have identified when we come back. Are you together? Let's come back by 12 o'clock. So we go for tea, we do whatever we're doing. We go to our classes. By 12, we must be here. Are we together? By 12:15, basically, we must be here. Are we together? Fantastic. So let's all go to tea and straight to our classes. I will be moving around and assisting and also spicing the debates. Thank you.